Hello everyone, welcome to my air show. I'm going to fly every single plane that I own. That's all the planes in IL-2 except for the LA5 FN and all the planes in Flying Circus. This is up to and including IL-2 Great Battle Series Update 3.009. Every aircraft in that except the LA5 FN. As you can see, I have a lineup, an extensive lineup of aircraft. I haven't counted them. I assume there's about 30 aircraft there. I've chosen Skin 2 and Skin 5 for each aircraft, just so that we're not on the default setting for every skin. That would be quite boring. This is a combat air show. There's going to be a lot of shooting and a lot of dropping of bombs at and on aircraft. You get to see the ordnance and the performance of every aircraft that I own, which is pretty much every aircraft in IL-2 Great Battles. Currently flying this here biplane. It's the latest collector plane. It's pretty cool. I believe it's called a PO2. It's the slowest plane in the game. Stalls at about 80 kilometers an hour. Cruises at 100 to 140 kilometers an hour, in my experience. If you've ever wondered what are all the aircraft in IL-2 Sturmovik Great Battle Series, now's the opportunity to eyeball them. Let's get started with the IL-2 itself firing some rockets. And crashing. As you can see, the crash model in IL-2 is unsurpassed. Here's a Focke-Wulf FW190. Oh no. I should mention I'm starting off with the bloopers. Always good to start off with bloopers. Those bombs were set to detonate in 15 seconds. The trouble is, when they hit some of the aircraft, they detonated something in the aircraft which exploded and damaged my plane and caused the crash. And that one was just straight up getting hit by my own bomb. I think I had it set to 1 second detonation. This is a Heinkel HE-111 dropping a 1,000 kilogram and an 1,800 kilogram bomb. And this is not a blooper, so that's how it should be done. And here's the landing. As you can see, I've got the flaps and the undercarriage down. I'm manoeuvring a bit to bleed off speed so that I don't overshoot the runway. Listen to those drum brakes. Alright, and that's a landing. What do we got next? That's a BF-109, I'm not sure which, it's an F or a G with a really awesome paint scheme. All the aircraft in this, I've optioned them up with the maximum cannon and heavy ordnance and machine guns and the maximum amount of ammo. There's a landing of sorts. So each aircraft, I mean this one's carrying 2 extra 20mm MG 151 cannon. And here's an IL-2, I believe it's a model 1942 or 1943. It's optioned with 2 3.7cm cannon. And it's carrying some bombs in the wings, which you may see shortly. And check out that paint scheme. It's quite radical. Now those are actually bomblets. They weigh each something like 2.5 kilograms. And they're designed to destroy tanks. Designed to destroy tanks. The roof of a tank, the skin is especially thin in comparison to the walls. So this one has dropped those bomblets to great effect. This is what I wanted to show. That's quite an innovative way of storing bombs. They're stored in the wing. The camber of the wing is thick enough at the wing root that you can store some bombs in there, and they've got that kind of open shut system for the bomb bay doors. I think that's pretty innovative. And there's some rockets. Boom boom. And yes, I appreciate there is some echo to my $6 Kmart headset microphone audio system. Deal with it. Another thing is you'll see the skins change. They'll sort of turn off and turn back on. That's because there's something like 35 aircraft while I'm playing, which is putting, I guess, extra stress on the game's engine and so on. Normally you won't see that. If you're playing with 10 or 15 aircraft, you won't see that, because I've got every single aircraft in the game simultaneously, plus explosion sprites and all sorts of other stuff, calculating the physics of the trajectory of bombs and cannon shells and machine gun bullets and that, all sorts of things. You'll see the skin turn on and turn off. It's merely a symptom of running the game with all the aircraft in the game at once, which is not really designed to do. So I'm pushing it to its limits, but as you can see, it's performing marvellously, notwithstanding that issue that you'll see the skin forget and then turn itself back on from time to time. It's a small issue, worth mentioning though at the outset. I think at this point I jumped into the gunner's turret and fired away at whatever was behind me. There we go. That's a pretty fast firing machine gun. I don't think it has much punch. It's more of an anti-personnel gun rather than an anti-aircraft weapon. And here's another FW-190. What type is it? I don't know, but to me it looks like an A3, FW-190 A3. I've got an A3, an A5 and an A8. And soon, when the rest of the Bodenplatte aircraft are released, I'll have a D9. Dora, the Explorer. I've optioned all of these up, as I say, with maximum cannon and machine gun and ammunition. So you're seeing these planes with their full clout and their full punch. And coming in for a landing, engine off landing. Occasionally I do turn the engine back on if I'm running very far short of the threshold, but most of the time I'm manoeuvring the aircraft and mushing the aircraft to try and bleed off altitude and speed so that I don't in fact overshoot the threshold. It's worth mentioning I'm not using track IR. My desk is at my country house. I'm currently in my city apartment. My moving house is just about complete, but I can't really use track IR unless I've got my desk, because you've got to have the levels correct between the headset and the sensor on top of the monitor. Can't really do it without the furniture. So I'm flying all these planes without track IR. And what you saw there was one of the new pilot models. And you could get a particularly good look at the pilot when he landed. When he landed and took his goggles off, flying here a Spitfire VB, which is the Mark V Spitfire. It has some Hispano-Suiza cannon, but only a very few rounds for them. So it packs a punch, but not for very long. Nothing like the ammo storage for the cannons of an FW-190, which have tons and tons of shells on board. Bear in mind that the Mark V Spitfire is a fairly early war machine, and it ammunitioned up and gunned up as the war progressed. And there's a lovely ground loop for you. And here's a perennial crowd pleaser. It's a Bell P-39 Airacobra. As we all know, the engine is behind the cockpit, so it's a mid-mounted engine. Very good at pitching up and down because of that. And it has a cannon in the nose on a kind of a shock absorber. I'll demonstrate that now. Boom. And some 50s in the wing. There's that pitch up motion. And some 50s in the nose. Also carries a bomb or two. Now I've got the engine off. I come in for some sort of a landing. Another notable feature of this plane, the tricycle undercarriage. Fairly rare for a fighter aircraft of that vintage, that early in the war. Only really got tricycle undercarriage on the big bombers like the B-29 and the B-24, and on jet aircraft like the Shooting Star and the ME-262. good thing about a tricycle undercarriage for a propeller plane is you'll never get a prop strike, more or less. Never say never, but it's much easier to get a prop strike with a tail dragger configuration to the undercarriage. And as you can see, I've got some lovely planes on this tarmac. And here's another FW. Carrying some rockets. And some cannon. What an impact, huh? Combination of 20 and 30 millimeter cannon there, and machine gun of 13 millimeter, I believe. Devastation. Those cannon really do the job. I think this FW is the A5, and it has two extra 20mm cannons outboard of the wing, which are the MGFF, and it has two default cannon in the wing root, which are MG150-120, 20mm cannon, and then it has two machine gun on top of the engine itself, and they are 13mm machine gun. I believe they're MG131 13s, something like that. And this plane features an insignia of a bomb with Mickey Mouse on the bomb, wielding a hatchet. And it looks like a Tunisian or North African style paint scheme. There's a landing. FW190s, extra robust because they weren't water or liquid cooled. They had an air cooled BMW radial engine. As you can see there, its cooling fan spinning away attached to the propeller. And here you can kind of get a good look at the new pilot model. He'll take his goggles off in just a tick, I trust. There he is. What do you reckon? Does that look like a Luftwaffe pilot circa 1944? What do you think? Also here you can get a good glimpse at those cannon, the MGFF outboard and the MG150-120 inboard. You can see the MGFF has a shorter barrel and the MG150-120 a longer barrel. Can be deceptive when they're buried deep in the wing, but it is indeed true that the MGFF has a pretty short barrel in comparison to the MG150-120. And there's our pilot. Yeah, what do you reckon? And also, what do you reckon about those rose-coloured lenses on the flying goggles? I think that was a single 500 kilogram bomb. And here we have a BF-109 G14. I can tell because it has the modern canopy and it has the ammo bubbles, the ammo bumps forward of the cockpit. Those two features combined make it a G14. Polycarp of I-16. A gutsy little fighter plane whose heyday would have been circa 1934. Back then it was high-tech. But by 1945 it was no match for planes the likes of the BF-109 K4. One thing to remember with the I-16, when you're landing, make sure you give yourself plenty of time between extending the gear and touching down, because the gear takes ages to fully extend. A few times I have touched down without fully extending the gear. I think it takes about 25 seconds from actuating the gear down for it to be actually locked down. Tip for young players. Another thing I've noticed, German planes, when they're dropping bombs, you can drop them from ground level, no probs. They'll detonate just fine. Soviet planes, you've got to be a certain minimum altitude above the ground, or else they won't hit the ground with sufficient force to trigger the detonator. For example, those bomblets, you've got to be something like, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember, with the PO2, the Polikarpov biplane, to drop bombs from that, you've got to be 250 meters above the ground, or else the bombs will not detonate. So it's kind of a hallmark of the Soviet bombs. You've got to be fairly high up off the deck before you drop your bombs, or else they won't explode. Whereas the German planes, they just don't have that issue. You can drop bombs from point blank, as it were, from ground level. You just got to then make sure that you set the detonation time to say 5 seconds if you're on the deck, to give yourself enough time to fly away before they detonate, so you don't get caught in the splash damage. this is a Heinkel HE-111. I believe it's dropping a maritime bomb, I guess designed to destroy a ship. I guess that's why it's painted blue. If I'm not mistaken, you can skip bomb with these maritime blue painted bombs, although I've never done it myself. There's two different versions of the HE-111 in this game. There's the H6 and the H16, and I believe one of them is a maritime version and the other is not. This one on the screen here, it's got a gun in the nose. That's an MGFF 20mm cannon. It's a German copy or made under license or something of the Swiss cannon, the Oerlikon 20mm cannon. There's a landing. There's those bomblets, those anti-tank bomblets. You can see that they are working from that altitude. I really think you've got to be at least 250 metres above the ground to use the bomblets effectively, otherwise they won't detonate. And this is a very peculiar paint scheme. I think this one is a Navy, an IL-2 1942 or 1943, because it's got the rear turret, and I think it's assigned to a Navy role. I think it's a post-war Navy training role. Going by what I remember of the description, it almost looks like a Christmas colour scheme, although of course it wouldn't be. Here's a BF-109F or G. I hit something there. Here's a 109. All guns blazing with some 20mm cannon wing pods. This game has the BF-109, F2, F4, G2, G4, G6, G14, K4, and right back to the beginning it has the BF-109 E7. So there's a ton of different BF-109s to try out in this game. And they're all excellent planes. And you saw there my tanks from the Tank Crew edition. And they're a work in progress. Already they're looking really awesome. You got the KV-1S, it's like a fast, heavy tank. You got the Tiger tank, and you've got a Panther, and you've got a T-34. Some iconic tanks from the conflict on the Eastern Front. Here's a Spitfire. It is a Mark 9 Spitfire. It's carrying a bomb and 2 air-to-ground rockets, and it has clipped wings. And I believe it's in a Australian Air Force library, or it's in a Far East Royal Air Force library. This is a late World War II library and a fairly late model Spitfire. Although, this being a Mark 9, bear in mind, obviously the Spitfires start with the Mark 1. This is a Mark 9. The very latest Spitfire was something like a Mark 23, and this is a Mark 9, so it's by no means the highest technology, latest and greatest Spitfire. And there's a ground loop for you. Here is the earlier of the LA5s. As I say, the only plane in the lineup that is missing from my video and my collection is the later LA5. I'm trying to remember which is which. There's the LA5 Series 8, which I think is what this is, and there's also the LA5 FN. The LA5 FN is a more advanced version of this plane, and it has a bubble canopy, so you can quickly identify it. And it's a higher performance plane. But this one here, the LA5 Series 8, it's no slouch in its own right. Very fast, good rate of roll, a bit like an FW190, minus the technology of the FW190. FW190 had really pretty spookily impressive technology. The semi-fly-by-wire style analog or mechanical computerized throttle of the FW190 being a good example. From what I understand, the pilot didn't need to muck around with mixture, propeller pitch, manifold pressure, all of those levers in the workload stress of combat. They just needed to push the throttle forward or retard it rearwards. Whereas in the LA5 you needed it to know what you were doing with all those levers, especially in the heat of combat, or else you'd get it wrong and break the engine, or just not produce as much power as you need to, or produce too much power when you didn't mean to, or have the propeller in the wrong setting, or the mixture in the wrong setting for the altitude, or what have you. It could get pretty complex, especially as you're trying to dogfight and manage the engine. This twin-engined aircraft is a PE-2, a Peshka PE-2. And it's roughly equivalent to a Mosquito, roughly. And actually, there's two different models of the PE2, and on landing I fell short with both of them. I don't know why. Let's chalk it up to an opportunity to show off the crash damage of the PE2. Note the twin cannon pods on each wing. Two 20mm cannons on each wing, in addition to all the default armament. It's an A5 or an A3. I think it's an A5, FW190A5. You can see it's wrought quite a bit of carnage there. I believe it's carrying 6 cannon in total, all of them 20mm. And two 13mm greater than 50 caliber machine guns. 50 caliber being 12.7mm. And this one has two 13mm machine guns. There's the power off landing, cockpit canopy rearward. And I'm just gonna glide it in. You can see those cannon pods there. They use that specifically for attacking heavy bombers like the B-17 and the B-24 Liberator. This one is a MiG-3. It's supposed to be a high altitude interceptor. Apparently it wasn't very successful. I'm not sure why. I have a suspicion that it found itself mostly fighting closer to the deck rather than at high altitude. My experience flying it, it's okay in a turn, like in a turn fight, and it's a pretty fast plane. It's not slow. It's not a bad plane. Although of all the Soviet planes, from the German perspective, the MiG-3 is one of the easier ones to shoot down. And yes, that's right, that's a MiG. So before Top Gun in 1986 with Tom Cruise and Goose and the F5 Tiger dressed up like a quote-unquote MiG, this was the original MiG. This is a MiG-3 before MiG transitioned to jets like the MiG-15, the MiG-17, the MiG-23, MiG-25, etc., etc. That red sash you see on this here, I think it's an A5. It's a high visibility, quick recognition kind of thing for the home defence. So this plane flew over Germany at the end of the war, and its job was specifically called home defence, and it had that red sash to try and encourage the 88mm anti-aircraft gunners to not shoot down this plane in particular, because it's not an Allied plane. There were tens of thousands of Allied planes in Germany towards the end of the war. So to differentiate this German plane from an Allied plane, the Germans painted a big red sash on the nose, or they painted red or different coloured markings, anything to differentiate it from an Allied plane. And here is a Yak. This is a Yak 7. Has a pretty high performance plane. In my opinion, the easiest to fly and the most high performance, the most potent Soviet plane in the game is the Yak 1B Series 127, and this is the Yak 7 because it comes chronologically after the 1B. You'd expect it to be better, but actually, although it's very good, it's not as good as the 1B Series 127. This plane is an IL-2 1941 model. You can tell it's a 41 because it doesn't have a rear turret gunner, as does the 1942 and 43 model. This plane actually has a radiator, kind of what you'd call an internal radiator. There's a big air scoop on top of the engine nacelle, and that's an air intake for the radiator for the engine. It's an internally placed radiator, and the hot air exhausted from the radiator exits the plane on the underbelly of the fuselage in that radiator looking pod there. But that's not a radiator, that's the exhaust for the internal radiator. So basically there's an S-bend inside the plane, and air enters the radiator from the top of the engine cowling where you've got that scoop, and then goes through the S-bend, hits the radiator, which is just forward of the firewall, so just forward of the cockpit and just behind the engine. The cool air hits the radiator, goes through it, I guess, or around it, and then gets exhausted on the underside of the fuselage there. So that's a kind of a redundancy feature, or a safety feature, for this specifically ground attack intended aircraft. It's an interesting innovation. It has an internal radiator. This plane here is the BF-109K4 coming in for a glide landing. You are witnessing a Fokker DR1 triplane, the red one. This was the livery the Red Baron Manfred von Richthofen had painted on his personal DR1. Those three wings give so much lift that it actually ironically makes a good ground attacker, because you can fly along with like the angle of the fuselage to the ground can be pointing down, as I'm doing here, even though the plane is flying straight and level. If you don't keep the nose pointed slightly down, the plane will start to climb. So that actually gives a benefit in ground attack. You can choose the sidearm that the pilot carries in these planes. I'm trying to remember which one I chose. I think it was a Colt 1911 or a Browning High Power. Here is a lag something, a lag 3. It was an okay plane, made of wood. Not quite enough power. They ended up chopping off the inline engine, inlined liquid-cooled engine, and replacing it with a radial engine. And then the lag 3 became the LA5, the plane that I referred to earlier in this video. It's exactly the same plane, just a different engine. And in the heat of World War II, that was actually a pretty pragmatic, realistic solution to improve the performance of their fighter fleet. Take a plane that's otherwise good, but is underpowered, and give it a more powerful engine, specifically by chopping off the liquid-cooled inline that you see here and replacing it with a more powerful radial engine. seems to be only one setting for the flaps, pretty much, either up or down. Here of course I've got them in the down position for my engine off landing. This is the IL-2 Series 127, a very difficult plane to defeat and a great plane to fly in combat. It has its weaknesses. Structurally, it's quite weak. It can't take battle damage if it gets hit, and it doesn't carry very much ammo and not many guns. Apart from that, it's really fast. It can pull high Gs. It's excellent in a turn fight, and I believe it carries one machine gun and one cannon, so if you do hit something with the cannon, it's lights out for the target. Has other good qualities too, like it has that wide undercarriage, which is good for landing. This is one of those planes that can get up into the 600 km/h range. It's a pretty fast plane. And here's a Douglas A-20B. Often known as the Havoc, or I think in the RAF it was known as the Boston. It's a pretty high performance plane, sort of like a B-25 Mitchell, maybe a bit smaller. B-25 Mitchell has 2 pilots. This plane has only 1 pilot. B-25 Mitchell has a tail gunner. This one does not have a tail gunner. Has a gunner facing rearward, but not an actual tail gunner. So I think it's a bit smaller than a B-25 if I'm trying to quantify this plane. It's really easy to land. It's got that wide track tricycle. It's got a gun in the nose. I think it's a 30 caliber, maybe a 50. I think it's a 30. It's sort of tokenistic. Mainly this is a bomber. It's a fast bomber. It's also manoeuvrable and aerobatic. Here's a PE-2 dropping its bombs. You can see that interesting location near the wheel wells, where there's a bomb each behind the engine, as well as the conventional belly bomb bay, and it carries rockets as well. It has a forward-facing machine gun, again fairly tokenistic. and it's got a lion painted on the nose. This plane looks to be made of aluminium, and it's a fairly fast plane. It's a medium bomber, I think. Pretty decent crash graphics with those wheels and everything. Here is a Lag 3 again, doing some bombing and strafing. It has a cat and a mouse painted on the tail. Here is a World War I plane. It's a Fowles D3. It has an inline 6-cylinder liquid-cooled engine. You can see the radiator flush in the top wing. That's a pretty bad place for a radiator. If it gets perforated by bullets, the pilot could get scalded by hot water. That's why they've offset the radiator slightly to the starboard in an effort to prevent the pilot from getting scalded. Mostly effective. This one, the Fowles D3, very similar to the Albatross D3. The Albatross is much better known than the Fowles. I believe this is a fairly late World War I plane, maybe 1916. And of course World War I lasted until 1918. The best fighter plane of World War I was the Fokker D7, and this plane, the Fowles D3, has some layout and configuration similarities with the D7. And here we have a P-40, the Kitty Hawk or the Warhawk or what have you, made by Curtis P-40 Kitty Hawk. This one is in the Flying Tigers library. It was, as far as I recall, something of an expeditionary force in China, an American led expeditionary force fighting the Japanese Air Force, Army Air Force in China in the early months of World War II. The Kitty Hawk has a interesting undercarriage style, folding and twisting. And folding backwards rather than lengthwise along the wing. It has a Allison engine. Pretty easy to spot the Kitty Hawk by that big air intake under the nose and the distinctive wing shape. The Kitty Hawk is equipped with 3 or 4 50 caliber machine guns per wing. It's a cantilever monocoque construction, fuselage and wing. Modern construction techniques. If anything, owing to its early vintage, it just needed a bit more power to make it extra competitive in World War II. It was a pretty good ground attacker, and it was a fighter that got the job done. Probably wasn't a match for a Zero, but it was no slouch either. And here we have a Mackie MC202. This one has an engine built up, and has the sound of those guns, eh? It has an engine built under license from Daimler-Benz. The only drawback to this plane that I can tell from my reading and my watching YouTube documentaries is that they only built a few of them. I think it's got 2 50 calibers or equivalent in the nose. Not exactly sure, but I think they built 600 of these, and in World War II terms, that's nothing. That's a month's worth of production for anyone else. If they'd built 30,000 of them, the outcome of the war may well have been different. But they didn't build 30,000, they built 600, which is a drop in the ocean. It's just not very many at all. So it was a good plane, just not many were built. This one here looks an awful lot like a BF-109 G14. Oh, I'm wrong. It's a G6. I can now tell the difference. Yeah, this one's a G6. It has those ammo bulges, but it has the old school canopy. Those two factors making it a G6. If it was a G14, it'd have the modern canopy, but it'd still retain the ammo bulges. If it was a K4, have the modern canopy, but no ammo bulges. Roughly that's how I can tell the difference between a G6, G14 and a K4 at a glance. Pretty confident this one here is a G6. And what I'm doing here, if you read the classic flying book, like a how-to guide, I think it's called Stick and Rudder. I think I read that in the school library when I was 16. Stick and Rudder. He talks about a mushing glide. This here is a mushing glide. I'm descending slowly, and now I've just broken out of the mushing glide because I'm on final approach, but it's a good way to descend slowly and fairly well in control. Mushing glide. Touching down a little bit short of the piano keys, but to me that's always preferable than overshooting. It's good to have more runway in front of you than behind you. This plane here is in the livery of the Finnish Air Force. The insignia was from an aristocrat of the Finns who donated an aeroplane to the Finnish Air Force back in the day. So then, the Finnish Air Force adopted the aristocrat's personal insignia as their Air Force insignia. That's the origin of that. And here we have a Henschel . This one is a dedicated ground attack aircraft. It's a Henschel HS-129. The pilot sits in an armoured cockpit, shaped like a bathtub, an armoured bathtub. There's plenty of cannon and machine gun. It has two Gnome Roan engines. I think they're each 450 horsepower. So it's not a very powerful plane. There is one benefit to having two engines, even though they're underpowered, and that is redundancy. If one of the engines shuts down, at least you've still got power in the other. Then again, you've got twice the surface area and volume for the enemy to target. I don't know, swings and roundabouts. I like this plane. That was a pretty good crash, eh? Not such a good landing. This is a BF-109 E7. It's the earliest model of BF-109 in this game. Although it's a really early model 109, it flies really well. It's really nice to fly. Has enough power, maneuvers well. This is more of a Battle of Britain era plane. The Germans stopped using this plane on the front lines. I'm pretty sketchy on it, but it would have been in 1942, probably early in 42, probably just after the Battle of Moscow and before the Battle of Stalingrad. However, they did, in a hand-me-down fashion, provide these planes to their Axis allies, Romania and Hungary. So Romania and Hungary were using the Bf-109E7 as the Germans were starting to re-equip with the Bf-109F2. This is a Bf-110. There's two different variations of the Bf-110 in this game. And both of them are high-performance, twin-engined, heavy fighters that can also double as light bombers. They can carry an assortment of weaponry, extra machine guns and cannon, and quite a few different bombs, but no rockets. I always felt that a good improvement to this plane would have been to ditch the rear gunner and to place on the centre of gravity, centre of pressure area within the cockpit canopy a huge fuel tank and make it a really long range aircraft. You could use it in a maritime role or something like that. Here's the earlier of the two variations. I can tell by looking at the engine. The engine kind of bulges up at the top. This is the earlier version of the 110 in this game, and it's in I guess it's a North Africa livery. This track has intermittent audio. Apologies for that. You can see the armoured plate seat that the pilot's got behind him. I don't know if the rear gunner got any armour. I hope he did. And there was a non-destructive ground loop. Here is a Junkers Ju-52 3M in Red Cross livery, and I've put some paratroopers in it, and I've put on a rear turret gunner, and he's about to drop his paratroopers onto the runway and then do a landing, an engine out landing on the runway, which I tried to plant the aircraft. I tried to stall the aircraft on top of those 4 tanks that are at the end of the runway, and you'll see the results of my efforts in just a minute. Pretty cool paratrooper exiting the aircraft graphic. That's a stall. Engine off. And now I'm diving back through the parachutes, heading for the runway. This plane seems to have flaps. To this day, I've never figured out how to extend them. If anyone knows, write it in the comments. I'd like to know how to use the flaps on this plane, if at all possible. I press F, and I just see a status message saying something like, flap steering activated, but it doesn't lower the flaps. Bingo. Here is a Republic P-47D Thunderbolt. What country's livery is that? I have a feeling it might be Belgium. It's got the invasion stripes on the wing and the fuselage, which is a insignia to anti-aircraft guns on the ground. Don't shoot, we're the Allies. It's a quick recognition feature. This one's carrying bombs, rockets, and 50 caliber machine gun. As per usual in this video, here's an engine out landing. I am wobbling all over the place on purpose because I'm trying to lose altitude without increasing speed. Aiming for the threshold of the runway where those remaining planes are and those tanks. That's where I'm aiming for. Doesn't matter if I'm a little bit short, but I don't want to be overshooting the threshold, the beginning of the runway. There we go. That'll do it. It's an easy plane to land. It's got that wide track undercarriage. And there's your P-47D Thunderbolt. And here is a Sopwith Camel dropping some bombs and shooting up everything on the ground. It has twin machine guns. I think they're air-cooled. And I think they're Maxim, twin air-cooled Maxim machine guns. It's a pretty short clip. There's the landing. Hard to fly. If you knew how to fly it, it was a good fighter plane. Had a terrible torque effect. There's some bombs internally stowed. This is a SPAD S-13. It's a French plane in American insignia. It's the Hat in the Ring Squadron. I think the boss of it was Eddie Rickenbacker. This is circa 1917. It's a fast, sturdy plane. Not incredibly manoeuvrable compared to, say, a Sopwith Camel or a Newport, or of course a Fokker DR1 triplane, which is the ultimate in manoeuvrability. Just crazy, off the charts manoeuvrable. This one's strong, fast, carries two machine guns. It's a pretty good plane. The SPAD. There's two types of SPAD. There's an S7 and an S13. This is the S13. It's a little bit faster. I think it does 220 kilometers an hour. Or it has 220 horsepower, one of those. This is the final plane in this video. This is a Junkers Ju-88 in a night attack skin. I've just dropped, I think, 4 250 kilogram bombs, although it can carry all sorts of different ordnance. It is a fast, strong, aerobatic medium bomber. And it also has dive brakes, so you can dive bomb with this plane. And I'm going to use those dive brakes right now because I'm very high. Look at the runway threshold down there. I'm going to deploy the dive brakes, so it'll slow me down quite a bit. I'll still overshoot the threshold, but the dive brakes assist me to land somewhere near the end of the runway. As I say, this is the last plane of this video. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. Merry Christmas. Hope you're having a nice time. I certainly am. Smash the like button. Become a subscriber of the channel if you haven't already. Become a patron of the channel on Patreon, or you can get a channel membership. I don't think they're activated yet, but I'm working on that. Channel membership in YouTube. If it's activated, you should see it next to the subscribe button. You can also donate to me to support this channel with Bitcoin and with Dogecoin. The links are in the description. Also, visit my website, froggyfrog9000.com, and I have all sorts of t-shirts and hoodies and sweatshirts and jumpers and that sort of thing with aircraft on them. If that's something you're interested in, find them on my website. They're available from Amazon. I've been froggyfrog9000. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.